A fragile page can hold ideas powerful enough to topple empires and shape our reality. We are exploring 41 historic manuscripts that fundamentally rebuilt human culture and thought. By the end, you will understand the hidden origins of your most basic beliefs about morality, power, and truth. We will uncover why a single medieval text was hidden in a cellar for its own protection, and how a simple list of arguments sparked a religious revolution that split a continent. These documents are the blueprints of our modern world, and their stories reveal how written words have always been humanity's most potent weapon for change. Which idea from the past do you think still holds the most power over us today? That fragile page you picture began its life in near total silence. For centuries, the only sound in a monastic scriptorium was the faint scratch of a quill and the slow crackle of a candle flame. A single scribe might spend years hunched over a desk, copying a text letter by letter onto handmade parchment. This was not a job for the impatient. It was an act of devotion, a physical and mental marathon undertaken to ensure that a crucial idea could outlive its author, surviving wars, plagues, and the relentless decay of time. These manuscripts were so much more than simple information repositories. Think of them as a civilization's cultural DNA, carefully encoding its deepest values, its spiritual beliefs, and its entire intellectual framework onto a material that could be passed forward. The physical object itself tells a story. The texture of the paper, the unique binding, even the notes scribbled in the margins by a long-dead reader, they all offer clues about the people who created, preserved, and sometimes risked everything to protect these treasures of thought. When you hold that context in your mind, the journey of these 41 manuscripts becomes infinitely more remarkable. They are not just old books, they are survivors. But how do we measure the true impact of a manuscript? The sheer age of a document does not guarantee its influence. Our selection for this list followed a strict and fascinating principle. We searched for documents that did not just mirror the world as it was, but actively forged a new one. We prioritized manuscripts that introduced a paradigm-shifting concept, a single idea so powerful it forced humanity to look at itself differently. These are the texts that challenged entrenched power structures, whether of kings or of the church. They provided the foundational frameworks for entirely new fields of human endeavor, from modern physics to political science. A manuscript's path to influence is as varied as the documents themselves. Some, like a religious text or a political pamphlet, achieved impact through explosive, widespread dissemination, copied and read by thousands. Others exerted a quieter, more profound influence by landing in the hands of a single pivotal thinker, who then absorbed its ideas and propagated them to the world through their own work. To build a truly comprehensive picture, we cast a wide net across geography and time. We considered works from ancient empires, medieval monasteries, and the dawn of the modern age. We looked across domains of influence, from the hard truths of science to the deep questions of philosophy, from the rules of governance to the boundless realms of literature. This rigorous methodology ensures our list is not a simple collection of old and important books, but a curated journey through the very documents that rebuilt human thought, one revolutionary idea at a time. The revolutionary power of writing first emerged in the river valleys of the ancient world. In places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, the ability to record language transformed human consciousness itself. Before writing, knowledge was fleeting, limited to what one generation could remember and pass along through speech and song. The invention of writing created a permanent external memory, a technology that allowed complex thought to escape the fragile confines of the human mind. The earliest manuscripts were astonishingly ambitious. They were not merely simple lists or basic records, though they included those things. A single clay tablet from ancient Sumer might begin with an inventory of grain shipments, a practical administrative task, and then seamlessly transition into a profound meditation on the nature of kingship and the will of the gods. To our modern minds, which tend to separate the practical from the philosophical, this blending seems foreign. For these early civilizations, the cosmic order and the accounting ledger were two sides of the same tablet. The material reality of these documents speaks volumes about their importance. Scribes in Egypt carefully inscribed hieroglyphics onto lengthy scrolls made from pressed papyrus reeds, creating relatively lightweight and portable texts. In Mesopotamia, they used a stylus to press wedge-shaped cuneiform characters into wet clay tablets, which were then baked hard in the sun or a kiln, making them incredibly durable. These were not casual creations. The immense labor involved in their production, from preparing the writing surface to the painstaking act of inscribing each character, proves that these societies recognized the immense value of preserving these specific thoughts. They established foundational ideas about justice, suggesting that a ruler's power should be bound by written laws accessible to all. They explored humanity's relationship with divinity, asking why we are here and what the gods require of us. The very survival of these manuscripts is a miracle. They endured centuries of neglect, buried in the ruins of palaces and temples. They faced deliberate destruction by conquering armies seeking to erase a culture's identity. They withstood the slow, inevitable decay of their organic materials. That they exist for us to study today is a testament to the incredible value their own cultures placed on them. These ancient texts are more than historical artifacts. They are priceless windows into humanity's first systematic attempts to understand our world, our societies, and our own place in the vast, unknowable universe. Deep within the ruins of a royal library in Nineveh, a discovery awaited that would shatter our assumptions about the dawn of literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, pressed into 12 fragile clay tablets, is not merely an ancient story. It is the first time in human history that we see our own reflection staring back at us, asking the same questions that haunt us to this day. This epic poem from ancient Mesopotamia introduces us to Gilgamesh, a king of immense power and pride, who rules the city of Uruk with an iron fist. The gods, seeking to temper his arrogance, create a wild man named Enkidu. Their ensuing friendship and adventures form the heart of the narrative, a tale of brotherhood that ends in profound tragedy. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is shattered. He is forced to confront a terrifying reality he had never considered: his own mortality. His grief launches him on a desperate, obsessive quest to find the secret of eternal life. This is the core of the epic's genius. It is humanity's first great literary exploration of what it means to be human in a world where death is the only certainty. Gilgamesh's journey is a raw, psychological portrait of a man raging against his own limits, a theme that would echo through every hero's tale written since. One of the epic's most startling passages is its detailed account of a great flood. A man named Utnapishtim is instructed by a god to build a boat and save his family and the animals from a divine deluge. The parallels to the later biblical story of Noah are undeniable and profound. This was not a case of one story copying the other. Instead, it reveals how powerful cultural narratives traveled along trade routes, were adapted by different peoples, and became foundational myths that shaped entire worldviews. The discovery of these tablets in the 19th century by archaeologists was an intellectual earthquake. scholars had believed the Hebrew Bible contained some of the world's oldest stories. Suddenly, here was a manuscript written over a millennium before the oldest biblical texts that demonstrated a sophisticated narrative structure, complex character development, and a deep philosophical inquiry into the human condition. It forced us to completely redraw the map of literary history. Through Gilgamesh's failed quest, the epic arrives at a quiet, powerful conclusion. True immortality is not found in a magical plant or a secret formula. It is found in the legacy one leaves behind, in the walls of a city built to last, and in the stories told about a life well lived. In this, the world's oldest great book, we find the very first answer to our deepest fear, an answer that still resonates with us thousands of years later. While Gilgamesh wrestled with the inevitability of death, another ancient civilization developed a detailed roadmap to conquer it. The Egyptian Book of the Dead presents a vision of the afterlife so intricate and demanding that one could not navigate it without a literal guidebook in hand. Its true name, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, reveals its ultimate purpose, a desperate, hopeful desire to escape the darkness of the tomb and live again in the radiant light of the sun. This was not a single, standardized book as we think of it today. It was a sprawling collection of spells, prayers, and elaborate illustrations, meticulously copied onto papyrus scrolls. Each manuscript was a customized project for a wealthy individual, a kind of ultimate insurance policy for the soul's journey. A scribe would take a standard set of texts and carefully insert the client's name into key passages, personalizing the magic to ensure it would work specifically for them. Imagine the immense care taken in this process, the belief that misspelling a single divine name or omitting a crucial illustration could mean the difference between eternal life and utter oblivion. The journey these texts describe is a perilous one, filled with monstrous gatekeepers, lakes of fire, and cryptic deities who demand the correct passwords. The most famous scene, and the one with the most profound philosophical weight, is the weighing of the heart ceremony. In a grand hall of the gods, the deceased's heart was placed on a scale and balanced against the feather of Maat, which represented truth, justice, and cosmic order. This was not merely a test of ritual purity. If the heart, heavy with lies, selfishness, or wicked deeds, outweighed the feather, a terrifying beast awaited to devour the soul entirely. But if the scales balanced, the person would be welcomed into the blissful afterlife. Here, thousands of years before the Ten Commandments, we find a powerful concept taking shape, the idea of a final judgment based on a person's moral character and earthly actions. Your eternal fate rested not just on your wealth or power, but on the weight of your own conscience. These beautifully illustrated papyri were therefore far more than religious souvenirs. They were active tools providing the precise incantations needed to pacify gods, transform into a lotus flower, or ensure the heart did not betray its owner during the final judgment. They codified an entire moral universe, establishing a direct link between ethical behavior in this life and reward in the next. This concept of posthumous judgment and personal accountability would ripple through time, influencing the development of Greek thought and later, foundational ideas in Christianity and Islam. The Book of the Dead presents a fascinating duality, a system where immortality could be achieved through a combination of righteous living and, crucially, the possession of the correct ritual knowledge. It reveals a culture that poured its greatest artistic and intellectual resources into answering the one question that haunted Gilgamesh, not with resigned acceptance, but with a detailed, illustrated plan for victory over death itself. The desire for immortality, so vividly mapped in the Egyptian scrolls, finds a different and perhaps even more profound answer in the echoing halls of ancient India. There, knowledge itself became the thing to preserve for eternity. The Rigveda Samhita, a collection of over 1,000 sacred hymns, did not begin its life on parchment or palm leaves. For centuries, it lived only in the human voice, passed from teacher to student in an unbroken chain of memory that spanned generations. This was not a simple act of rote memorization, but a sophisticated, multi-layered oral tradition designed with the precision of an engineering blueprint. Specific families were entrusted with specific parts of the text. One group would memorize the words, another the melodies, and a third the intricate rhythms. They would practice together and separately, their recitations cross-checked to ensure that not a single syllable, not a single musical accent was ever lost or altered. Can you imagine the immense cultural pressure, the sacred duty, felt by these guardians of sound? They were the living manuscripts, their minds the only library ensuring these cosmic ideas would survive. When the hymns were finally committed to written form, it was almost as a backup to this flawless human technology. The content of the Rigveda is as staggering as its method of preservation. These are not simplistic prayers for rain or victory in battle, though such themes are present. They are deep, probing inquiries into the very nature of existence. One of the most famous hymns, the Nasadiya Sukta, contemplates the moment of creation with a philosophical sophistication that feels utterly modern. It describes a time before being and non-being, before even the gods themselves existed, when there was only a vast cosmic breath. The hymn builds to a breathtakingly humble conclusion, stating that perhaps even the highest deity does not know how creation happened, for even they may have come after it. This is not dogmatic assertion, but a courageous admission of the ultimate mystery. The language used to explore these ideas is itself a work of genius. Composed in ancient Sanskrit, the Rigveda's verses are built on complex meters and intricate patterns of sound that are almost mathematical in their precision. The very act of reciting them was believed to have power to harmonize the individual with the cosmic order. This focus on perfect phonetic transmission made the Rigveda an accidental gift to future science, providing linguists with an unparalleled window into the sounds and grammar of one of the world's oldest languages. Its influence did not stop there. The abstract reasoning required to ponder concepts like cosmic order, consciousness, and the one unifying principle behind the universe's diversity laid the groundwork for entire schools of philosophy, from the logical systems of Nyaya to the monistic insights of Vedanta. The Rigveda's legacy is a quiet but immense undercurrent in human thought, a testament to a culture that believed the most important truths were not just to be written down, but to be breathed into life over and over again forever. Yet the search for cosmic order took a remarkably different shape along the riverbanks of ancient China. While the Rigveda preserved eternal sound, another manuscript taught that nothing was eternal except change itself. The I Ching, or Book of Changes, began as a divination manual for the Western Zhou dynasty, a way for rulers to seek guidance from the spirit world. But over centuries, it transformed into something far greater, a complete philosophical system that has guided Chinese thought for 3,000 years. Its core is deceptively simple, a set of 64 symbols called hexagrams. Each hexagram is a stack of 6 lines, some unbroken representing the yang principle, and some broken representing yin. These are not random drawings, they are combinatorial symbols built from the bottom up, representing every possible situation in the human experience. One hexagram might symbolize creative force, another stillness, a third difficulty or transition. The genius of the I Ching lies in what accompanies these symbols, a series of poetic, enigmatic commentaries that do not give direct orders but instead offer a reflection on the nature of the moment. You do not read the I Ching for a straightforward answer. You consult it to understand the pattern of energy at play in your situation, the hidden dynamics between people, or the natural trajectory of an event. This creates a fundamentally different way of thinking about reality. Unlike Western philosophical texts that often build a linear, logical argument toward a single truth, the I Ching presents a circular, relational worldview. It teaches that change is the only constant, and that within every extreme lies the seed of its opposite. Just as day contains the promise of night, and success holds the potential for future failure, every situation is in a state of perpetual, flowing transformation. This is why a hexagram can transform into another with the flip of a single line, revealing how a moment of peace can suddenly give way to conflict, or how perseverance in difficulty can lead to a breakthrough. The book's enduring influence is a testament to its practical depth. Confucius himself reportedly said that if he could have 50 more years to study it, he might free himself from major errors. Generations of philosophers, military strategists, artists, and rulers have used it not as a fortune-telling device, but as a tool for honing their perception. It trains the mind in pattern recognition, encouraging a person to see the underlying currents in a complex situation rather than getting stuck on surface-level details. It advocates for harmonious adaptation, teaching that the wise person does not fight the flow of change but moves with it, finding the most effective and ethical path forward within an ever-shifting world. This manuscript established a uniquely East Asian approach to wisdom, one that values fluid insight over rigid dogma, and that finds profound meaning in the endless dance of complementary opposites. This relentless pursuit of truth required a radical new method, one born not in a temple but in the public squares of Athens. Plato's dialogues capture this intellectual revolution in action, preserving the original voice of his teacher Socrates for all time. These manuscripts are unlike any philosophical text that came before them. They do not lay out a neat, finished system of beliefs for the reader to accept. Instead, they are dramatic performances of thought itself, showing you the messy, difficult, and exhilarating process of thinking through a problem from the ground up. The core of this method is the dialectic, a rigorous back and forth of questions and answers designed to tear down shaky assumptions. Socrates would approach someone who claimed to know what justice or courage was, and with polite but relentless questioning, he would expose the contradictions hidden within their conventional definitions. The goal was not to win an argument, but to clear away the intellectual rubble of unexamined opinions, creating a space where genuine understanding could be built. The manuscripts themselves became the vehicle for this unique voice, his ironic tone and his unwavering commitment to following the argument wherever it led, even if it led to uncomfortable conclusions. This established philosophy not as a set of abstract theories to be studied, but as a lived practice, a daily discipline of questioning everything, most of all oneself. The survival of these texts was anything but certain. After Socrates was executed by the Athenian state for corrupting the youth, his methods were dangerous. Plato's decision to write these conversations down was an act of profound courage and preservation. The original manuscripts and their early copies were carefully studied in the academy he founded, but their influence would have been snuffed out if not for a long and perilous journey. Greek copies were safeguarded in the Eastern Roman Empire, while other works were translated into Arabic by Islamic scholars who recognized and expanded upon their logical brilliance. This dual transmission through both Christian and Islamic intellectual traditions ensured that Plato's most powerful concepts would survive the collapse of empires and the Dark Ages. His theory of ideal forms, the idea that a perfect, abstract version of everything exists beyond our flawed sensory world, would later be woven into Christian theology to describe the nature of God and heaven. His vision of a philosopher king, a ruler guided by reason and truth instead of greed or ambition, became a recurring dream for political reformers during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Every time a thinker argued that reason, not mere tradition, should guide human affairs, they were walking a path first cleared by the questions in these ancient dialogues. Plato's dialogues captured the drama of the question, but it was his most brilliant student who dedicated his life to crafting the answers. Aristotle's sprawling corpus of manuscripts did something no single work had ever attempted. They sought to systematically organize the entire universe of human knowledge. From the intricate biology of sea creatures to the abstract principles of a just society, no subject was beyond the reach of his methodical mind. His writing style stands in stark contrast to Plato's literary artistry. His texts read like incredibly dense, detailed lecture notes. They are working documents likely used for teaching and research at his school, the Lyceum. This very lack of polish reveals a mind in constant motion, classifying, defining, and building complex frameworks from the ground up. He was creating the foundational vocabulary for entire disciplines, giving us terms like metaphysics, ethics, and politics, and establishing the basic categories of logic that would shape rational thought for 2,000 years. The survival of this monumental collection of thought hinged on a moment of sheer desperation. After Aristotle's death, his personal library of manuscripts, including his own lecture notes, was left to his successor. Facing political turmoil and the threat of seizure or destruction, his followers made a fateful decision. They sealed the precious papyrus scrolls inside a damp, hidden cellar in Asia Minor. There they remained, forgotten by the world for nearly 2 centuries. Imagine these foundational texts of Western thought, slowly decaying in the dark, their ideas suspended in time. Their rediscovery was a fluke of history, a chance find that brought them back into the light where they were copied, sold to a collector, and eventually transported to Rome. This incredible journey did not end there. The manuscripts were then preserved and extensively studied by Islamic scholars, who wrote detailed commentaries on them, before their eventual reintroduction to a Europe emerging from its dark ages. This fragile chain of transmission, from a Greek cellar to Baghdad and back again, underscores a haunting truth. Our entire intellectual heritage could have been lost to a bit of moisture or a political purge. Once recovered, Aristotle's system provided the essential architecture for the medieval mind. His logical works became the bedrock of scholasticism, the dominant intellectual method of the universities. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas wielded Aristotle's logic to reconcile faith with reason, building vast theological systems that relied on his methods of categorization and deduction. But his influence was not confined to the abstract. He championed the radical idea that knowledge should begin with empirical observation, with looking carefully at the real world. He dissected animals to understand their anatomy, catalogued political constitutions to compare systems of government, and based his ethics on the study of how people actually live and strive for happiness. This insistence on grounding theory in evidence, on starting with what you can see and measure, planted the seed for the scientific method itself. His manuscripts became the ultimate curriculum, structuring the very idea of a university as a place for specialized, systematic inquiry into different branches of knowledge. Every time you take a biology class, debate an ethical dilemma, or analyze a political structure, you are engaging with a world that Aristotle's relentless mind first mapped into being. The intellectual frameworks of Athens were built to last, but the most important manuscripts are sometimes the ones hidden away, waiting to be found by pure chance. In 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd tossed a rock into a cave near the Dead Sea, hoping to scare out a lost goat. the sound he heard was not the scuffle of an animal but the shattering of clay. Climbing inside, he found not a goat but several large jars containing bundles of ancient leather scrolls. This accidental discovery would unlock the single greatest cache of biblical manuscripts ever found, a collection known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. The subsequent searches of 11 caves over the next decade yielded an astonishing treasure, hundreds of texts meticulously preserved in the dry desert air, sealed in jars for 2,000 years. The scrolls were a time capsule from a period of immense religious turmoil, the Second Temple era, a time when Judaism was a vibrant tapestry of competing sects and ideas, all existing in the centuries just before and during the birth of Christianity. Before this discovery, our oldest complete Hebrew Bibles dated from the Middle Ages. Suddenly, scholars were holding fragments of these same texts that were over 1,000 years older. This was like having a blurry, heavily edited photograph replaced with a high-definition, behind-the-scenes look at the original. The scrolls revealed that the biblical texts were not born perfectly fixed and standardized. There were small but significant variations in the wording of books like Isaiah and the Psalms, showing scribes actively engaging with and sometimes adapting the sacred words. It proved the Bible had a dynamic, living history before it was formally codified. Alongside these familiar texts were entirely new documents, rule books, and religious commentaries from a strict separatist community, likely the Essenes who lived at the site of Qumran. These sectarian writings describe a group waiting for an apocalyptic war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, led by a teacher of righteousness who interpreted the law in a radical new way. This portrait of a highly disciplined, expectant community shattered the old assumption of a monolithic Judaism. It revealed a landscape buzzing with theological debate, where different groups held wildly different interpretations of Scripture and eagerly awaited a messianic age. The parallels to the language and ideas found in the New Testament are striking and continue to fuel intense debate. Did John the Baptist have contact with this community? Were their concepts of a final judgment and a messianic figure part of a broader cultural current that also influenced Jesus and his followers? The scrolls do not provide simple answers, but they illuminate the shared soil from which both rabbinic Judaism and Christianity eventually grew. Their survival is nothing short of miraculous, a deliberate act of preservation by a community that saw their world collapsing around them, who hid their most precious library in caves, hoping it would be safe until a time of renewal. That a shepherd's random toss of a stone finally brought them into the light is a reminder that our understanding of the past is always just one discovery away from being completely rewritten. The quiet order of a geometric proof, where every step follows logically from the last, feels a world away from the chaotic caves of Qumran. Yet this very idea of systematic reasoning, a cornerstone of modern thought, finds its ultimate source in a single manuscript. Euclid's Elements did far more than teach geometry. It taught humanity how to think with unshakable certainty. Its 13 books begin with a set of simple, self-evident truths, statements so clear they could not be denied, such as the fact that all right angles are equal, or that a straight line can be drawn between any 2 points. From these humble foundations, Euclid builds an entire intellectual universe, one proposition at a time. Each new theorem rests firmly upon the ones that came before, creating an unbreakable chain of logic that climbs from the most basic definitions to the most complex and beautiful geometric realities. This was the birth of the axiomatic system, a model for constructing knowledge that felt as solid and permanent as stone. The journey of this manuscript through time is a story of cultural rescue. While much of Europe was fragmented and Greek learning was lost, the Elements found enthusiastic guardians in the Islamic world. Scholars in Baghdad and elsewhere did not merely preserve the Greek text, They translated it, studied it, and wrote extensive commentaries that questioned and refined its ideas. They ensured its survival through the very centuries when its light might have been extinguished forever. When it finally returned to a reawakening Europe, translated from Arabic into Latin, its impact was immediate and profound. For over 2,000 years, it became the standard textbook for mathematics, but its influence bled into every corner of intellectual life. Students were not just learning about triangles and circles, they were being trained in a mental discipline, the art of deductive reasoning. This rigorous method of starting from first principles and building an argument step by logical step became the gold standard for truth in fields far beyond mathematics. Philosophers like Spinoza modeled their ethical works on its structure, attempting to build a system of morality as certain as a geometric proof. The framers of modern governments were subtly influenced by its example, envisioning a constitution as a set of clear, foundational principles from which all just laws could be logically derived. The Elements taught a powerful lesson that transcends its subject matter, that the most complex and magnificent truths can be built from a few simple, honest beginnings, if only we have the patience and the rigor to follow the logic wherever it leads. While Euclid built a world of perfect geometric certainty, another manuscript accepted the messy, chaotic realities of human ambition. The Arthashastra offers no pristine theories of justice, only a chillingly precise blueprint for raw political power. Attributed to the ancient Indian strategist Kautilya, this comprehensive treatise reads like a manual for running a vast, complex empire, covering everything from tax collection and spy networks to the finer points of agricultural policy and royal succession. Its vision is ruthlessly pragmatic, concerned not with how a ruler should be, but with how he must act to survive and expand his dominion in a dangerous world. Kautilya famously compared a king to a fisherman, always ready to exploit turmoil in the rival kingdoms around him. He advised monarchs to think of their neighboring states as a circle of enemies, with each one a potential friend or foe depending on the shifting balance of power. This relentless focus on realpolitik feels startlingly contemporary, a stark contrast to the idealistic republics and philosopher kings of the Western tradition. The Arthashastra's genius lies in its systematic detail. It doesn't just say a king needs spies, it meticulously classifies them, listing agents who should pose as ascetics, merchants, or even cooks planted in an enemy's palace. It outlines a sophisticated bureaucracy with specific salaries for everything from chariot drivers to chief ministers, and proposes a complex system of taxation that accounts for the profits of prostitutes and the yield of mango groves. This was not a work of abstract philosophy, but a functional operating system for a state, built on a deep, almost scientific observation of human nature and the dynamics of power. And then it vanished. For over 1,000 years, this monumental work was lost to history, its radical ideas surviving only in fragments quoted by other texts. Its rediscovery in 1905 was a seismic event for Indian historiography and political science. A single palm leaf manuscript was found, carefully copied by a scribe centuries earlier, and presented to a library in Mysore. This sudden re-emergence from the dust forces us to ask a haunting question. How many other intellectual traditions have been completely erased, their insights lying dormant in some forgotten archive, waiting for a chance discovery to bring them back into the light? The Arthashastra does not contradict ethical approaches to governance, but rather complements them by holding up an unflinching mirror to the mechanics of the state. It reminds us that before we can build a just society, we must first understand the cold, hard machinery of power that makes any society possible. The Arthashastra's cold calculus of power stands in stark contrast to a manuscript born from a world of warring states and social chaos, one that offered a radically different path to stability. Confucius's Analects presents no grand political strategy, only a quiet insistence that a good society begins not with laws, but with the cultivated character of the individual. This is not a single, systematic book. It is a collection of fragments, a mosaic of conversations, anecdotes, and brief sayings recorded by the philosopher's disciples. You do not read it for a linear argument, you absorb it piece by piece, like listening to the wisdom of an elder who understands that true learning requires you to do half the work yourself. The format is the message, its very structure demanding active reflection and personal application, embodies the core Confucian belief that education is not about memorizing facts, but about shaping a more ethical human being. The system it builds is deceptively simple, resting on a few foundational pillars. At its heart is Ren, a concept often translated as humaneness or benevolence, the inner moral sense that compels us to treat others with compassion and respect. This inner virtue is then expressed through Lai, the practice of ritual and proper conduct in every social interaction, from how you serve tea to a guest to how you mourn a parent. The most famous of these principles is Zairo, or filial piety, the profound duty and reverence one owes to one's parents and ancestors. For Confucius, the family was the primary training ground for all morality. If you learn respect and obligation within the home, you will naturally extend that respect to your community and your rulers. This creates a powerful chain of ethical cause and effect. A son who is filial will become a loyal minister. A ruler who cultivates his own virtue will inspire loyalty and righteousness in his people without needing to resort to harsh punishments. The Analects argues that political order flows directly from this personal moral order. The most stunning implementation of this philosophy was the Chinese imperial examination system, an institution that lasted for over 1,000 years. Government officials, the bureaucrats who ran the massive empire, were not chosen by birth or wealth. They were selected through a series of brutally difficult exams that tested their mastery of the Confucian classics. To gain power, you had to prove you had internalized the wisdom of the Analects. Imagine a system where the path to political influence was not through military conquest or inheritance, but through a deep, demonstrated understanding of ethics, poetry, and history. This created a ruling class, the scholar officials, who were unified by a common culture and a shared ethical language. It was the most ambitious and long-lasting attempt in human history to put philosophical ideas directly into the machinery of governance, proving that words on a page could indeed shape the character of an entire civilization for millennia. From the disciplined transmission of the Rigveda to the rediscovered libraries of the Dead Sea, we see a pattern emerge, a civilization's core ideas forged in the crucible of copying and debate. But no collection of manuscripts demonstrates this process more powerfully than the Bible itself, which is not a single book but a vast library bound together. Its journey from scattered scrolls to a unified canon is a story of monumental human effort, fraught with disagreement, devotion, and the constant possibility of losing its most vital parts forever. The foundational texts of Judaism and Christianity were composed over 1,000 years by countless authors, from poets and prophets to kings and scribes, each writing for their own time and community. For centuries, these texts existed as separate manuscripts, their authority debated and their contents fluid. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls gave us a breathtaking snapshot of this very process, revealing the small but significant variations that existed before the texts were fixed. But two other manuscripts, the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus, represent the next critical phase, the moment when the early Christian Church began to codify its official New Testament. These are not small scrolls, they are massive 4th century codices, written on fine vellum in uncial script, representing an enormous investment of labor and a deliberate attempt to gather the most important texts into a single, authoritative volume. Their existence tells us that the Bible as we know it was not born, it was built through a painstaking process of selection and consensus. The differences between these early codices are not errors, they are evidence, showing scholars which books were considered essential and which were still on the margins of acceptance. This was not a quiet, orderly process. It was a fierce, living debate about the very nature of divine revelation, preserved in the parchment and ink of competing manuscripts. How did a set of ancient laws and spiritual testimonies come to shape the bedrock of Western culture? Their power was unlocked not just by their content, but by a series of revolutionary translations that shattered the language barrier. For centuries in Europe, the Latin Vulgate, translated by Jerome in the 4th century, was the exclusive property of the educated clergy. The scriptures were a locked room, and only priests held the key. But when reformers like Martin Luther translated the Bible into robust, accessible German, and when committees of scholars produced the majestic English of the King James Version, they did more than change words, they democratized divinity. Suddenly, a farmer or a merchant could, in theory, access the sacred texts without a mediator. This direct access empowered individuals, fostering literacy and creating a new sense of personal responsibility for one's faith. The cultural aftershocks were immense. The Bible's narratives provided the core archetypes for Western art, from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel to countless passion plays. Its legal principles, particularly those from the Hebrew Bible, deeply influenced concepts of justice and moral law. Its poetic forms, the parallelisms of the Psalms, and the stark visions of the prophets shaped the very rhythm and imagination of literature for centuries. The manuscript tradition of the Bible proves that a text's greatest power is not in its perfection, but in its perpetual translation, both linguistic and cultural, allowing it to be reborn and reinterpreted by every generation that encounters it. The profound authority of a text could rest on the very sound of its syllables. Emerging from the deserts of 7th century Arabia, the Quran presented a radical new kind of manuscript, one whose divine origin was inseparable from its linguistic form. According to Islamic tradition, these were not the reflections of a prophet, but the direct, uncreated words of God, revealed to Muhammad and meticulously memorized and recorded by his companions. This belief made the physical preservation of the text a matter of urgent communal importance. Following the prophet's death, and as the early Muslim community expanded rapidly beyond Arabia, variations in recitation began to appear. It was the third caliph, Uthman, who recognized the existential danger of a fractured revelation. He ordered the creation of a single, authoritative master codex, compiling the revelations from fragments of parchment, leather, and bone, as well as from the living memories of the reciters. All other competing versions were systematically destroyed to ensure unity. This act of standardization under Uthman in the 7th century created a manuscript tradition of unparalleled stability. From the grand mosques of Istanbul to the islands of Indonesia, the Arabic text of the Quran has remained virtually unchanged for over 1400 years, a consistency that has bound a global civilization together. This textual stability unlocked a second, equally powerful force, the elevation of the Arabic language itself into a sacred art form. The Quran's linguistic rhythm, its intricate rhyming prose known as Saj, was considered a miracle in itself, a beauty so profound it was taken as proof of its divine source. To preserve and study this miracle, classical Arabic grammar was systematically codified directly from the Quranic text. The language of the revelation became the eternal literary standard, a unifying thread that allowed a Persian poet, a Spanish philosopher, and an Indian jurist to communicate and build upon a shared intellectual heritage. But the Quran was never meant to be a closed book. Its verses provided the foundational principles for a complete way of life, inspiring the development of sophisticated legal systems, known as Sharia, where scholars engaged in deep interpretation to apply divine guidance to new and complex human situations. This same intellectual energy, fueled by the Quran's encouragement to observe and reflect upon the natural world, propelled centuries of scientific advancement. Muslim astronomers mapped the stars, physicians pioneered new surgical techniques, and mathematicians developed algebra, all within a civilization that saw the pursuit of knowledge as an act of piety. The reverence for the word naturally spilled over into its physical presentation. Because depicting the divine through images was forbidden, the artistry of the manuscript focused entirely on the word itself. Calligraphy became the highest form of visual art, with scribes spending a lifetime perfecting fluid, majestic scripts to honor the sacred text. These beautifully illuminated pages were not merely read, they were experienced as a visual echo of the text's spiritual power. This aesthetic principle extended far beyond the page, influencing the very architecture of mosques, where vast, swirling calligraphic bands of Quranic verses framed domes and adorned walls, seamlessly blending scripture with structure. From its unchanging textual core to its boundless cultural expressions, the Quran demonstrates how a single manuscript can become the beating heart of a civilization, shaping everything from law and science to the most fundamental ways a society sees beauty and seeks truth. A single manuscript could rescue an entire intellectual civilization from the dust. That was the monumental task Emperor Justinian set for his legal scholars in the 6th century, as the Western Roman Empire lay in ruins. Roman law, a vast and sophisticated system built over 1,000 years, was fracturing into disconnected local customs, its deepest wisdom scattered and fading. Justinian's response was the Digest, a work of breathtaking ambition that was not a creation of new laws, but a brilliant salvage operation. His team of jurists scoured libraries across the empire, reading through thousands of outdated legal scrolls. Their mission was to extract the most valuable principles and the most insightful commentaries from the great Roman jurists of the past, compiling them into a single, coherent body of law. The result was a massive encyclopedia of legal reasoning, a 50-book testament to the Roman genius for order. The Digest did more than just save these ideas from oblivion, it organized them. It systematically arranged centuries of complex thought into a logical structure, creating a clear map of the entire legal landscape. This structure famously divided the law into 3 fundamental categories: the law of persons, which defined status and citizenship, the law of things, which governed property and inheritance, and the law of actions, which outlined the procedures for bringing a case to court. This simple yet profound organizational scheme would echo for more than a millennium, becoming the invisible backbone of nearly every modern civil law code in the world today. But the Digest's true power lay in its content, a sophisticated balance of high principle and gritty practicality. It wrestled with abstract concepts of justice and equity, while also providing detailed rules for commercial contracts, maritime loans, and property disputes. It established a clear, predictable legal framework that was essential for the complex trade and commerce that would later fuel Europe's growth. Then, like so many foundational texts, it vanished from widespread view, preserved only in a handful of copies in the Byzantine East. Its rediscovery in 11th century Italy was a legal and intellectual earthquake. A single, complete copy was found in a library in Pisa, and its arrival sent shockwaves through the nascent universities of Bologna and elsewhere. Suddenly, medieval scholars had access to a legal system far more advanced than their own. They pored over its pages, writing glosses and commentaries in the margins, sparking a revival of Roman law studies that would completely reshape European jurisprudence. The digest provided the conceptual tools for building strong, centralized states, offering monarchs a sophisticated alternative to the messy patchwork of feudal customs. Its emphasis on the state's authority and on universal principles helped lay the groundwork for the modern concept of the rule of law. This single manuscript, born from an empire's collapse, became the hidden architect of the legal world we now take for granted, proving that the most durable power is often not held by a sword, but structured by a system. Fire nearly erased this epic from history. The single surviving manuscript of Beowulf, a small book written around the year 1000, bears the scars of a terrible library fire in 1731, its edges charred and brittle. This fragile object is our only window into a vanished world, a roaring mead hall of a poem that captures the soul of early Germanic Europe. At its heart, Beowulf is the story of a hero from Jutland who travels to aid a Danish king whose great hall, Heorot, is being terrorized by the monstrous Grendel. The poem unfolds across three colossal battles, first against Grendel, then against Grendel's vengeful mother, and finally, decades later, against a fire-breathing dragon. These are not just fights, they are profound explorations of a warrior code where a man's worth was measured by his courage, his strength, and the loyalty he inspired in his comrades. The tension within the manuscript is palpable. The story is drenched in pagan values, in the glory of feats of arms, and the grim acceptance of a fate woven by the Norns. Yet the poet who wrote it down was almost certainly a Christian monk, who subtly frames the narrative within a new moral universe. Grendel is described as a descendant of Cain, the biblical first murderer, placing the ancient monster tale within a Christian cosmology. This fusion creates a unique cultural document, a snapshot of a society straddling two worlds, its warrior ethos slowly being reinterpreted through the lens of a new faith. What does it mean to be a good man in such a world? The poem suggests that physical courage remains, but it must be tempered by humility and service to a higher purpose. The monsters Beowulf faces are not just physical threats, they are manifestations of chaos, envy, and greed, forces that destroy community. When Grendel attacks Heorot, he is attacking the very symbol of human fellowship, the light and song and warmth that define civilization against the cold dark. Beowulf's ultimate battle with the dragon, which ends in his own death, elevates the hero's purpose from personal glory to the defense of his people. His final wish is not for more treasure, but for a barrow built high on a cliff, a beacon for sailors that will remind them of his name and his deeds. This is the poem's ultimate answer to mortality, the same one hinted at in Gilgamesh, that legacy is the only immortality we can truly grasp. The survival of this single scorched manuscript means that the voice of the Anglo-Saxon scop, the poet singing in the hall, was not entirely silenced. It preserved the oldest significant work of English literature, a linguistic treasure trove that gives us words and rhythms that would later echo in the works of Tolkien and countless other storytellers. Its narrow escape from the flames is a haunting reminder of the countless other epics, songs, and stories that were not so lucky, their voices lost to us forever. A millennium ago, in a world lit by paper lanterns and governed by intricate social ritual, a lady in waiting at the Japanese imperial court began to write a story that would capture the human heart with a new and startling intimacy. Murasaki Shikibu's The Tale of Genji unfolds not with the clatter of swords, but with the quiet rustle of a silk kimono and the profound ache of a love letter left unanswered. This sprawling narrative, often called the world's first psychological novel, charts the life and countless loves of the radiant Prince Genji, the Shining One. Yet the plot is almost secondary. The true drama plays out in the subtle spaces between the lines, in the fleeting expressions its hero tries to decipher, and in the complex inner lives of the women he pursues, elevates, and sometimes abandons. Murasaki's genius was to map this invisible emotional terrain, exploring the psychological toll of romantic longing, social jealousy, and the rigid conventions of high-end court life with a depth that feels utterly modern. The physical manuscript was an extension of this aesthetic world. These were not crude, mass-produced books. Each copy was a unique art object, meticulously handwritten in flowing cursive script on beautifully textured, often delicately scented paper. The quality of the calligraphy and the choice of paper were direct reflections of the owner's taste and status, and the very act of reading was a multisensory experience. A suitor's literary skill, judged by the elegance of his handwriting and his ability to compose a poignant poem, could be as seductive as his appearance. This deep connection between the medium and the message created a literary tradition where emotional nuance and aesthetic sensitivity were paramount. Unlike many Western novels that build toward a clear moral resolution, the tale of Genji meanders through a life, accumulating moments of intense beauty and profound loss. It is steeped in the Buddhist concept of mono no aware, a gentle sadness for the transience of all things, the exquisite cherry blossom that falls at the peak of its beauty, the morning frost that vanishes in the sun, the fading perfume on a love letter. All these are metaphors for the inevitable passing of life, youth, and love. This focus on mood and impermanence over plot and permanence established a distinctive narrative approach that would shape Japanese literature, art, and even cinema for 1,000 years. The tale's survival, copied by hand for centuries before the advent of printing, is a testament to its enduring power to articulate the most delicate vibrations of the human soul. The power of a king could now be measured in the recorded value of every pig and plough. In 1086, 2 decades after his conquest of England, William I ordered a survey of his new kingdom so exhaustive it stunned his contemporaries. Royal commissioners were dispatched to every shire where they summoned local juries and grilled them under oath. What is this manor called, who held it in the time of King Edward, who holds it now? How many hides of land, how many ploughs, how many villagers, slaves, free men? How much woodland, meadow, pasture? What were its assets worth then, and what are they worth today? The answers were meticulously written down in ink on durable sheepskin parchment, compiled into the volume we know as the Domesday Book. This was not a casual inquiry. It was a total audit, a systematic seizure of knowledge for the purpose of power. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written by those who lived under this new rule, captured the profound unease it caused, noting that not one ox, nor one cow, nor one pig was left out. The resulting manuscript was so definitive, so unassailable in its recorded facts, that it quickly earned the nickname Domesday, for like the last judgment of God, its pronouncements were final and there was no appeal. This was the ultimate expression of a new idea, that control over a territory could be achieved not just by building castles and stationing knights, but by mastering information itself. For William, the book was a practical tool. It told him exactly who owned what, who owed him service, and most critically, how much tax he could rightfully demand. It allowed the Norman rulers to bypass the old Anglo-Saxon power structures and impose a new, centralized system of governance directly onto the landscape. But for us, centuries later, the Domesday Book is something far more precious, a frozen moment in time. It is a vast, open window onto the world of 11th century England. We can trace the boundaries of long-vanished villages, understand the rhythms of a peasant economy, and see the stark hierarchy of a feudal society laid bare in columns of Latin text. It proves that the written word, in the form of a single, authoritative manuscript, could become the very foundation of a state, turning the messy reality of a conquered land into neat, manageable data. While kings surveyed their lands and emperors codified their laws, a quiet rebellion was brewing in the damp fields of Runnymede. The Magna Carta, sealed under duress by a deeply unpopular English king in 1215, began not as a grand declaration of human rights, but as a practical list of grievances from his most powerful subjects. These barons were not idealistic philosophers. They were frustrated landowners pushed to the brink by King John's arbitrary taxes and cruel abuses of power. Their demands, written onto parchment, were intended to curb a specific tyrant, not to define liberty for all time. Yet within its very specific clauses, the Magna Carta planted a seed of a revolutionary idea: the principle that no ruler, not even a king anointed by God, was above the law. This was a direct challenge to the concept of absolute royal authority that had dominated the medieval world. The document's most famous clause, number 39, stated that no free man could be imprisoned, stripped of his possessions, or harmed in any way except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land. This single sentence, born from a baron's fear of the king's dungeon, would echo for centuries as the bedrock of due process. It established that justice must be a public, predictable procedure, not the private whim of a single man. The immediate impact of the charter was fleeting. King John renounced it almost immediately, and the Pope annulled it. But the manuscript had been created, and its words could not be unwritten. Its true power lay dormant, waiting to be rediscovered and reinterpreted by future generations who needed a weapon against oppression. The fact that multiple copies were made and distributed to counties across England was crucial. It meant the idea could not be easily suppressed. Each of these surviving copies is slightly different, a testament to the document's origins as a negotiated settlement, not a perfect text. Over the following centuries, English parliamentarians fighting the absolutist ambitions of the Stuart kings dusted off the Magna Carta and held it up as an ancient guarantee of English liberties. They argued that its principles of due process and consent for taxation were the nation's birthright. This reinterpretation transformed a feudal bargain into a constitutional touchstone. Its influence then leaped across the Atlantic. American colonists, chafing under British rule, saw themselves as the modern equivalents of those 13th-century barons, defending their ancient rights against a distant king. The Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, which guarantees that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, is a direct philosophical descendant of that clause penned at Runnymede. The Magna Carta's journey proves that a manuscript's greatest legacy may not be its immediate success, but its stubborn refusal to be forgotten, its words gathering power as they are passed like a torch from one struggling generation to the next. A mind of the 13th century could hold the entire cosmos, from the nature of God to the logic of a falling stone, within a single, unified system. That was the monumental ambition of Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologica. This was not a simple book of prayers, but a vast architectural structure of thought, written to reconcile two seemingly opposed worlds: the logical, empirical philosophy of Aristotle and the revealed truths of Christian faith. Aquinas did not see them as enemies. He believed that reason and faith were two different paths leading to the same ultimate truth, both gifts from the same divine source. His manuscript is organized with a lawyerly precision that reflects this conviction. it is broken down into questions which are then divided into articles. Each article begins by posing a clear, often difficult question, such as whether God exists or whether it is ever permissible to tell a lie. He then lists a series of objections, powerful arguments against his own eventual position. This was the core of the scholastic method, a disciplined way of thinking that forced students to confront the strongest possible counter-arguments before a conclusion was even suggested. Only after this would Aquinas present his own reasoned response, building a case from both philosophical principles and scriptural authority, and finally, he would offer a precise reply to each of the initial objections. Reading the Summa is like watching a master architect at work, laying a foundation, testing its strength against pressure, and then carefully building upward, story by logical story. This structure created a safe, formal space for rational inquiry within a faithful context. A monk could rigorously debate the mechanics of the soul or the ethics of an economic transaction without fear of heresy, because the method itself was designed to arrive at orthodox conclusions through the disciplined use of logic. The Summa's influence seeped far beyond monastery walls. Its question and answer format became the standard model for university disputations across Europe, training generations of students in the art of constructing and deconstructing a complex argument. Its systematic approach to natural law, the idea that a fundamental moral order is woven into the fabric of creation and accessible to human reason, provided a philosophical foundation for Western legal systems, suggesting that human laws should reflect this deeper, universal justice. Even the early scientists who would later challenge the Aristotelian physics that Aquinas relied upon, inherited from him a crucial belief that the universe was rational, orderly, and therefore capable of being understood by the human mind. This single manuscript became the ultimate curriculum, a mental gymnasium that exercised the intellect of the West for centuries, proving that faith did not have to demand the surrender of reason, but could invite it into a grand and collaborative inquiry. A prison cell in Genoa seems an unlikely place to redraw the map of the world, yet it was there in 1298 that a captive merchant named Marco Polo dictated his memories to a fellow prisoner, a writer of romances. The resulting manuscript, known as the Travels of Marco Polo, was not a dry logbook. It was a portal, swinging open a door in the medieval European mind to reveal the staggering civilizations of the East. Polo described cities of 1 million souls with paved streets and efficient postal systems, while London and Paris were still muddy, cramped towns. He wrote of a substance dug from the earth that burned black stones, coal, a fuel unknown in the West. He detailed the use of paper money, a concept so alien it seemed like magic, where the emperor's seal could turn a piece of paper into legitimate currency. For a Europe that saw itself as the center of the civilized world, these were paradigm-shattering revelations. The account forced its readers to confront a humbling reality that other societies had achieved technological and administrative sophistication far beyond their own. The manuscript's journey into the European consciousness was as remarkable as the travels it described. Without the printing press, its influence spread through the laborious copying of scribes, each handwritten version a testament to the story's compelling power. These copies were not perfect, and variations crept in, some adding fantastical details of men with dogs' heads or rivers flowing with gems. This very blurring between observed fact and traveler's tale is why historians still debate the precise accuracy of his claims. Was he really a trusted official in the court of Kublai Khan? Did he truly see all the wonders he described? The debate, however, misses the point of the manuscript's true power. Its impact was not in its flawless precision, but in its potent inspiration. It created a powerful vision of the East as a land of immense wealth and advanced culture, a vision that would haunt the European imagination for centuries. This single handwritten narrative, passed from one curious reader to another, directly fueled the ambitions of explorers. Christopher Columbus owned a heavily annotated copy, and his own voyage across the Atlantic was in part a desperate attempt to reach the fabled lands of Cathay and Cipangu that Polo had described. The world was reshaped not just by ships and sails, but by the words on a page that made such a journey thinkable. A prison cell gave the world a new map of the earth, but a poet's exile would soon chart the eternal geography of the soul. Dante Alighieri began his Divine Comedy not as a published work, but as a series of cantos circulated among friends and patrons, a project born from his own bitter expulsion from his beloved Florence. His journey through the three realms of the afterlife was far more than a theological tour. It was a profound synthesis of an entire age's thought, weaving classical philosophy, cutting-edge astronomy, and ruthless political commentary into a single, soaring poetic structure. He chose not to write in the scholarly Latin of the universities, but in the vibrant, accessible Tuscan dialect of his homeland, a decision that would ultimately forge that vernacular into the literary language of Italy. The poem's immediate and explosive popularity is proven by the manuscript evidence alone, with hundreds of handwritten copies circulating across Italy and beyond decades before the printing press was even a concept. This was not a text locked away in monasteries. It was a living, shared cultural event, copied by enthusiasts who desperately wanted their own piece of this breathtaking vision. Dante's genius lies in his fusion of the universal and the intensely personal. The cosmology is vast and meticulously ordered, with 9 concentric circles of hell, the terraced mountain of purgatory, and the celestial spheres of paradise, all reflecting the medieval understanding of a God-ruled universe. Yet the pilgrim walking through this grand architecture is not an abstract everyman, but Dante himself, guided first by the Roman poet Virgil, representing human reason, and then by his idealized love, Beatrice, representing divine revelation. This narrative device, a specific individual experiencing the ultimate realities, was revolutionary. Readers did not just learn about hell, they descended into the frozen lake of Cocytus with Dante, feeling the biting cold and hearing the agonized chatter of Satan's teeth. They did not just study the concept of contrition, they climbed the arduous slopes of purgatory with him, feeling the weight of sin slowly lift. The poem is also a blistering chronicle of its time, populated with Dante's contemporaries, from popes and emperors to his own personal enemies, all assigned to their respective eternal fates based on his uncompromising moral judgment. This was literature as both divine comedy and political revenge, a cosmic courtroom where the poet served as judge and jury. The archetypes he created burned themselves into the Western imagination, the star-crossed lovers Paolo and Francesca forever whirling in the wind of their passions, the treacherous Ugolino endlessly gnawing on the skull of his enemy. These were not just punishments, they were psychological portraits, perfect metaphors for the inner state of a sin. By making his own subjective experience the lens through which humanity could view its ultimate destiny, Dante planted the seed of Renaissance humanism, shifting the focus from divine mystery to the human capacity for understanding, love, and error. His manuscript did not just describe a journey, it invited every reader to walk beside him, to see their own world reflected in the divine mirror of eternity. Dante's cosmic journey gave Italian its literary soul, but the English language was still waiting for its own defining voice. That voice arrived not in a single epic, but as a chattering crowd of travelers on the road to Canterbury. Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, penned in the late 14th century, did something quietly revolutionary. He wrote not in the official Latin of the scholars or the elegant French of the nobility. but in the rough, vibrant Middle English of the London streets. This was a deliberate choice, a declaration that the language of common life was worthy of great literature. The genius of the tales lies in its frame. We meet a group of pilgrims from every rung of the medieval social ladder, from a noble knight and a worldly prioress to a grimy miller and a shrewd wife of Bath. Their journey is a story in itself, but the real magic begins when they agree to tell tales to pass the time. Each character's story is a reflection of their own world. The knight tells a chivalric romance full of noble love and tragic fate. The miller, drunk and boisterous, follows with a bawdy farce about a cuckolded carpenter. This structure creates a breathtaking panorama of an entire society, all talking at once. You hear not one official version of truth, but a cacophony of competing voices, each with its own biases, its own humor, and its own wisdom. The survival of the Canterbury Tales is a story of fluidity. There is no single, perfect original manuscript. Instead, we have over 80 handwritten copies from the 15th century, each one slightly different. Some tales appear in one version but not another. The order of the stories shifts. Scribes felt free to add their own lines or even entire new passages. This was not considered corruption. It was part of the life of a text in an age before printing. A manuscript was not a frozen monument, but a living performance, adaptable to the tastes of a new patron or the memory of a particular storyteller. This very messiness gives us a richer understanding of how medieval audiences experienced literature, not as a fixed object, but as something that could grow and change with each retelling. Chaucer's masterpiece gave English literature its essential toolkit. He blended high romance with low comedy, moral allegory with biting social satire, creating templates that would be used for centuries. More importantly, he proved that the vernacular could capture the full, chaotic, and beautiful spectrum of human experience with an immediacy that no scholarly Latin text could ever achieve. He turned the English language itself into a pilgrimage, setting it on a path that would one lead to Shakespeare and beyond. The familiar scratch of the scribe's quill was about to be drowned out by the rhythmic clang of metal. The 42-line Bible produced by Johannes Gutenberg around 1455 was far more than a beautiful book. It was a perfectly tuned machine for thinking. Its true innovation was not that it was the first book printed with movable type, but that it solved every single technical problem of the printing process at once, creating a system that could work reliably, efficiently, and on a scale previously unimaginable. Gutenberg was not merely a printer, he was an engineer of information. He had to invent a durable metal alloy that could hold sharp letters through thousands of impressions. He formulated a new oil-based ink that would adhere cleanly to metal type and transfer clearly to vellum or paper. He adapted the mechanics of a wine press to apply an even, immense pressure across an entire form of type. Each of these components was a breakthrough in itself, but combined, they created a self-contained revolution. The genius of the Bible's design was its psychological insight. To a reader accustomed to the unique flow of a handwritten manuscript, this new object had to feel trustworthy. Gutenberg's team carefully mimicked the elegant scripts of the professional scribes, even using elaborate hand-painted initials and decorations added after printing to complete the illusion. The goal was to make the technological leap invisible, allowing the content itself to assure the reader that this was a legitimate, sacred text. This careful design choice helped ease Western society across a technological threshold, from the culture of the unique copy to the culture of the identical edition. The impact of this shift was tectonic. For the first time, two scholars in different countries could debate a passage from the same book, confident they were looking at the same words on the same line on the same page. This new standard of textual consistency became the invisible bedrock for every scientific revolution and religious reformation that followed. Knowledge was no longer a river that changed course with every copyist's error. It was now a solid foundation upon which new ideas could be systematically built. Gutenberg's press did not just make books cheaper, it made them reliable, and in doing so, it gave the world a new tool for building consensus about reality itself. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks feel like a captured storm of human curiosity. Thousands of pages filled with meticulous sketches of swirling water, detailed studies of the human heart, and designs for impossible flying machines, all scrawled in his secretive mirror writing, accessible only to the man himself and to those who held the pages up to a looking glass. These were not manuscripts made for a king or a public audience. They are the private laboratory of a single mind, a place where the rigid categories of art, science, and technology simply melted away. On one page, you find the delicate smile of a woman, a study for the Mona Lisa. Turn the page, and you are plunged into the gruesome, beautiful reality of a dissected human face, its muscles and nerves laid bare. For Leonardo, the artist's need to depict the world accurately and the scientist's desire to understand its underlying mechanics were one and the same relentless drive. His method was radical in its humility. He trusted his own eyes over the ancient authorities. He would write, "I shall test it myself," before accepting any claim about the flight of birds or the flow of blood. This commitment to direct observation, to learning from nature rather than just from books, marks a pivotal shift in the history of thought. He was piecing together a new methodology, one where creative speculation was always grounded in empirical evidence. He would dream of a submarine, then meticulously calculate the challenges of water pressure and breathable air. He envisioned an ideal city with two-level streets for sanitation and traffic flow, blending architectural vision with a practical understanding of public health. This fluid movement between question and answer, between problem and inventive solution, models the very essence of interdisciplinary thinking that would later fuel the scientific revolution. The survival of these notebooks is its own kind of miracle. At his death, they were not a single, bound volume, but a chaotic mountain of loose papers and unbound folios bequeathed to his young assistant. They were then scattered, sold off in lots, forgotten in attics, and divided among collectors across Europe. Some were bound into codices that bear his name, like the Codex Leicester and the Codex Atlanticus, while other pages were lost forever or cut out and sold individually. This fragmentation shows just how vulnerable a personal, unpublished manuscript can be. Its collective wisdom always one estate sail away from being dispersed into meaningless fragments. That we can still piece together so much of Leonardo's mental universe today is a testament to the sheer volume of his output and the later recognition of its priceless value. These pages continue to inspire not because they provide finished answers, but because they let us witness the beautiful, messy, and gloriously human process of asking questions. Leonardo's notebooks celebrated the beautiful union of observation and imagination, but another manuscript from the same era would tear them violently apart. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince not for publication, but as a private letter of advice, a desperate attempt to win favor with Florence's new rulers after his own torture and exile. Its power was born in secrecy, circulating in handwritten copies among a small, shocked circle of Renaissance intellectuals long before it ever saw a printing press. Machiavelli was not an evil counselor teaching tyranny. He was a political realist conducting a brutal autopsy on the corpse of the Italian republics. He asked a single, devastating question. If your goal is to seize power and keep it, what actually works? His answer deliberately stripped away all the comfortable moralizing that had draped political theory for centuries. He separated the question of political effectiveness from the question of moral goodness, analyzing power as a doctor might analyze a disease with cold, clinical precision. A ruler, he argued, must understand when to be a lion and when to be a fox, when to keep his word and when to break it for the sake of the state's survival. This was not a celebration of cruelty, but a stark warning about its necessity in a dangerous world. The manuscript's shocking reputation comes from this very pragmatism. It forced its readers to confront the chasm that often exists between how we wish power operated and the grim, messy reality of how it is actually gained and maintained. By analyzing political reality without the lens of religious doctrine or philosophical idealism, Machiavelli established an entirely new tradition of thought. He created the vocabulary for modern power analysis, a tradition that would later influence the founding of secular states, the strategic calculations of business empires, and the cold calculus of revolutionary movements. His name became an adjective Machiavellian, a testament to the enduring discomfort his little manuscript still provokes, forcing us to wonder whether it is better for a leader to be loved or to be feared. A single sheet of paper nailed to a church door can shatter 1,000 years of unity. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, posted in 1517, began as an invitation to a scholarly debate, a list of arguments questioning the church's sale of indulgences. These were certificates believed to reduce the punishment for sins, a practice Luther saw as corrupting the very meaning of faith and repentance. He argued that salvation was a matter of divine grace and inner faith, not something that could be purchased with coin. The act of posting the Theses was not an act of rebellion in itself. It was standard university practice, a way to announce a public disputation. But the manuscript's content was a spark landing on a continent soaked in spiritual gasoline. The true revolution was not in the nailing, but in the printing. Luther's friends quickly translated the Latin text into German and used the relatively new technology of the printing press to flood Europe with copies. For the first time in history, a theological argument could not be contained and suppressed by distant authorities in Rome. Pamphlets and broadsheets carried Luther's words across German-speaking lands and beyond, moving faster than a papal bull could travel. This was the moment the press became a weapon of mass dissent, proving that a dangerous idea, once set into type, could become an unstoppable force. Why did these technical arguments about church practice ignite such a firestorm? Because they gave voice to deep, simmering currents of discontent. There was a growing resentment of the distant papacy's financial and political power, especially among German princes eager to assert their own authority. There was a profound hunger among ordinary people to access scripture and faith directly, in their own language, without relying on a priestly class as the sole interpreter of God's will. Luther's call for a priesthood of all believers and his subsequent translation of the Bible into the vernacular tapped directly into this powerful desire for personal connection with the divine. The manuscript's impact rippled out far beyond the walls of the church. The Reformation it sparked permanently fractured Western Christianity, leading to a century of religious wars and redrawing the political map of Europe. It empowered monarchs to break from Rome, accelerating the rise of the modern nation-state. It placed a new emphasis on individual conscience and literacy, fundamentally altering how people saw their relationship with God, with their community, and with themselves. A list of 95 points intended for an academic discussion had unlocked forces that would reshape the soul of the West. A quiet Polish canon dared to move the sun. Nicolaus Copernicus spent decades perfecting his mathematical model of the cosmos, a system that placed the sun, not the earth, at its stable center. His manuscript on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres was delivered to him on his deathbed in 1543, a final, cautious act of sharing a truth he knew would shake the world. He framed his radical idea not as a physical fact, but as a mathematical hypothesis, a clever device that made the complex geometry of planetary motion far simpler and more elegant than the clunky, Earth-centered Ptolemaic system. This was not a bold declaration, but a whispered suggestion wrapped in complex equations, a testament to his deep understanding of the theological and philosophical earthquake his calculations represented. For over 1,000 years, the Earth's central place was not just a scientific fact, it was a divine necessity, a physical confirmation of humanity's special role in God's creation. To remove Earth from the center was to risk dislodging the human soul from its privileged position, making humanity passengers on a minor rock orbiting a mundane star. The manuscript's initial impact was therefore muted, confined largely to a small circle of mathematical astronomers who appreciated its elegant solutions to long-standing problems in predicting planetary positions. It took generations for the full weight of its implications to be felt, for the mathematical model to be tested, confirmed, and eventually championed by minds like Galileo and Kepler. The Church, initially tolerant, eventually condemned the work as the heliocentric idea gained traction and began to fundamentally challenge scriptural interpretations of a stationary Earth. This slow burn from obscure thesis to heretical doctrine demonstrates a profound truth about paradigm shifts. They do not happen overnight. A new idea must first prove its utility, solving old problems with a new clarity, before it can begin to dismantle the old worldview it threatens. The ultimate triumph of the Copernican model was not its immediate acceptance, but its undeniable predictive power, its mathematical beauty that simply worked better than the alternative. In this quiet revolution, humanity was demoted from the center of creation, but reason was elevated, and mathematics was crowned as the true language of the physical universe, a tool capable of revealing truths that defied common sense and challenged divine authority. The stage was meant to be ephemeral, its words vanishing into the air the moment the actors spoke them. Plays were disposable entertainment, not literature worthy of preservation. Then, in 1623, a book appeared that defied this entire notion. The first folio, published 7 years after William Shakespeare's death, was a monumental act of rescue. It gathered 36 of his plays into a single, heavy volume, and of those, a full 18 had never been printed before. Without this specific manuscript, we would have no Macbeth, no Julius Caesar, no The Tempest. Their entire worlds would have been lost to silence. This was not a project led by distant scholars, but by Shakespeare's own friends and fellow actors, John Hemminge and Henry Condell. They knew the man's genius intimately, and they compiled the folio from his working papers, the prompt books used in performances, and their own memories. Their dedication preserved not just the plots, but the very rhythm and soul of the dialogue. They organized the plays into a new structure that would shape theatrical history itself, the categories of comedy, history, and tragedy. This was more than a filing system. It was a way of thinking about human experience, framing our follies, our political struggles, and our deepest moral crises as distinct yet connected dramatic forms. The texts inside, while not perfect, offered a far more reliable version of the plays than the cheap, often pirated quartos that had circulated before, which were frequently full of errors copied down by hasty audience members. The folio gave us the Canon, the foundational versions of Hamlet's soliloquy and Cleopatra's lament. But its true gift was linguistic. Shakespeare's pen was a forge, hammering raw English into new words and phrases that seeped into the language's bloodstream. He gave us such common terms as assassination, lonely, and generous, transforming nouns into verbs and adjectives with a playwright's alchemy. His psychological insight gave characters like Iago and Lady Macbeth a terrifying interior depth that felt startlingly modern. The folio ensured that this linguistic and imaginative wealth would not be a fleeting echo in a London playhouse, but a permanent, growing resource for the entire world. It proved that the most transient of arts could, through the right manuscript, achieve immortality. Galileo's dialogue was a masterpiece of strategic disguise. Printed with the official blessing of the Church's own censors, it presented itself as a balanced conversation between three old friends, yet every line of it hummed with a dangerous purpose. The characters are brilliantly chosen. Salviati, a sharp-witted philosopher, voices the new Copernican ideas. Simplicio, a dedicated follower of Aristotle, defends the old Earth-centered universe. And Sagredo, an open-minded layman, listens, questions, and guides the reader toward the most reasonable conclusions. Under the gentle pretense of impartial debate, Galileo systematically dismantled the cosmology that had stood for 2 millennia. He used the moons of Jupiter and the phases of Venus, observations made with his own telescope, not as abstract theories, but as evidence presented in a lively discussion anyone could follow. This literary choice was his genius. He was not writing for other astronomers alone. He was writing for the curious public, pulling back the curtain on the new universe and inviting everyone to look for themselves. The censors who approved it were fooled by its structure, missing the fact that Simplicio, the defender of the old ways, was often made to look foolish, his arguments crumbling under the weight of simple, observable facts. Of course, the authorities were not fooled for long. The dialogue was a direct challenge, and it landed like a bomb in Rome. Galileo had been warned years before not to hold or defend the Copernican theory. He believed this dialogue, which only discussed the system without formally defending it, would protect him. He was wrong. The subsequent trial was not merely about astronomy, it was about authority. Could an individual, armed with a telescope and his own reason, claim to understand the heavens better than the united wisdom of scripture and tradition? Galileo's forced recantation and lifelong house arrest made him a martyr for science, but his manuscript had already done its work. It could not be unread. The dialogue transformed a mathematical hypothesis into a public conversation, proving that the most powerful ideas are those that escape the study and learn to speak in the voice of the people. A radical new kind of certainty was found not in the stars, but in the quiet of a stove-heated room. René Descartes, a French philosopher and mathematician, began his search for truth by systematically tearing down the entire edifice of his own knowledge. In his 1637 Discourse on the Method, he proposed a thought experiment of profound doubt. What if everything you have ever learned from your senses is an illusion? What if you cannot even trust that you have a body or that the world around you is real? He pushed this skepticism to its absolute limit, imagining a powerful deceiver, a malicious demon dedicated to tricking him at every turn. In this landscape of total uncertainty, one unshakable fact remained. The very act of being deceived, of doubting, required a thinking mind to perform it. From this irreducible core, he drew his famous conclusion, "I think, therefore I am." This single, crystalline statement placed the conscious self at the very center of the universe of knowledge. For the first time, the foundation of philosophy was not God, nor ancient authority, nor sensory experience, but the individual's own capacity for reason. Descartes then used this solid ground to rebuild a world of knowledge, step by logical step, like a mathematician proving a theorem. His method was a set of mental rules to accept nothing as true that was not clearly and distinctly perceived, to break down every problem into its smallest parts, to proceed from the simplest ideas to the more complex, and to review everything thoroughly to ensure nothing was omitted. This was a recipe for thinking, an algorithm for the mind itself. The decision to publish this revolutionary work in French, the language of educated laypeople, rather than the scholarly Latin of the universities, was a deliberate act of democratization. It was an invitation extended to any curious individual with a command of their own tongue to join the grand project of reasoning from first principles. The manuscript's influence rippled far beyond the philosophical salons. His mechanistic view of the physical world, envisioning the universe and even the bodies of animals as complex clockwork, provided a powerful framework for the emerging sciences. In psychology, his separation of the thinking mind from the mechanical body, known as Cartesian dualism, set the terms for centuries of debate about consciousness. Even our modern world of computer science owes him a quiet debt, for his vision of a step-by-step, algorithmic method for processing thought is a direct ancestor of the logical processes that drive every digital machine. Descartes did not just give us a phrase, he gave us a tool, a mindset that empowered the individual to become the architect of their own understanding. The universe finally spoke in the clear, clean language of mathematics. Isaac Newton's Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica arrived in 1687 as a book so dense with geometrical proofs that even the most brilliant minds of his era struggled to comprehend it. He was not describing a new philosophy, he was revealing the operating system of reality itself, written in a code of unbreakable laws. At its heart were three simple, yet universe-spanning principles. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by a force. The change in motion is proportional to the force applied, and for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. These were not just rules for how cannonballs arc, they were the very scripts for how all matter, from a falling apple to an orbiting moon, must behave. Then came the grand synthesis, the law of universal gravitation. This was the truly revolutionary leap, a single mathematical force that governed the apple in his garden and the moon in its path around the earth. The same gravity that made his footfall heavy on the ground also reached across the vacuum of space to hold the planets in their celestial tracks. With this, Newton shattered the ancient Aristotelian divide between the corrupt, changing world of Earth and the perfect, immutable realm of the heavens. He proved they were one single physical domain, all dancing to the same mathematical tune. The tools he used to build this system were as revolutionary as the conclusions. To model continuously changing forces and motions, he invented a new kind of mathematics, what we now call calculus. He applied its power to deduce the shapes of planetary orbits from the principle of gravity alone, showing that the elegant ellipses described by Kepler were a necessary consequence of an inverse square law. This was the Principia's most profound lesson, not just its specific laws, but its method. It established a template for all future science, a process of proposing a mathematical law, deducing its consequences, and then checking those predictions against the observed world. The book itself was a fortress of geometry, its arguments so rigorous and its mathematics so advanced that it created an inner circle of understanding. You either grasped the proofs and accepted the conclusions, or you remained outside. This very inaccessibility, however, cemented its authority. It was not a book of speculation, it was a monument of logic. Its gradual acceptance did not just change physics, it changed the human psyche. The universe was no longer a mysterious realm of capricious spirits and divine whims. It was a vast, predictable clockwork, its gears and springs laid bare in the Principia's pages. This vision of a rational, law-bound cosmos would become the bedrock of the Enlightenment, inspiring thinkers to search for similar natural laws in human society, economics, and politics. Newton had given humanity the ultimate key, revealing that the deepest secrets of the cosmos were not written in magic but in math. But who defines the proper limits of a ruler's power? A manuscript published anonymously in 1689 answered this with a radical new source of authority, the people themselves. John Locke's two treatises of government emerged from the political turmoil of England's Glorious Revolution, a bloodless transition of power that deposed an absolutist king. Locke's work provided the intellectual backbone for this shift, systematically dismantling the doctrine of the divine right of kings. He proposed a different origin for political power, one that began not with God's anointment, but with the natural rights of every individual. Before any government existed, he argued, people lived in a state of nature, possessing fundamental rights to life, liberty, and property. This was a revolutionary starting point, grounding political legitimacy in the individual, not in a monarch's birthright. The core of his argument is the social contract, a voluntary agreement among free people. To escape the potential insecurities of the state of nature, individuals rationally choose to surrender a small portion of their freedom to a common government. But this surrender is not absolute. The government's only legitimate purpose is to protect those very rights the people already possessed, their lives, their liberty, and the property they have mixed with their own labor. If a government fails in this sacred duty, if it becomes tyrannical and threatens the rights it was created to protect, the people retain the right to resist and replace it. This was not just a theory, it was a justification for revolution. Locke's manuscript gave the Glorious Revolution a philosophical language, transforming a political event into a principle of governance. His ideas then traveled across the ocean, where they found fertile ground in the American colonies. Thomas Jefferson's famous phrase in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is a direct echo of Locke's triad of natural rights. The American revolutionaries saw themselves as enacting Locke's philosophy, dissolving their political bonds with a government that had violated the social contract. The French revolutionaries, too, would draw upon this language of popular sovereignty and inherent rights, but Locke's influence was not only political. His theory of property, that a person gains ownership of something by mixing their labor with it, provided a powerful moral and economic justification for private property. This idea would resonate through the works of later economists like Adam Smith, shaping the very foundations of capitalist thought. The enduring power of the two treatises lies in its simple yet profound framework. It asks us to see government not as a master but as a servant, an instrument created by free people to secure their freedom. Every time we debate the limits of state power or assert the primacy of individual rights, we are speaking the language that this anonymous manuscript first helped to write. But a government of laws requires more than just a social contract. It demands a specific architecture. A massive, anonymous manuscript published in 1748 offered the blueprint. Montesquieu spent 2 decades researching the spirit of the laws, a sprawling comparative study that examined governments from ancient Rome to the empires of Asia. His revolutionary idea was that no single set of laws could fit every society. He argued that a nation's legal system must be a reflection of its unique character, shaped by its physical size, its climate, whether its people lived in fertile plains or mountainous terrain, and deeply influenced by its dominant religion, its commercial habits, and its ancient customs. A law that worked for a small island nation would strangle a vast continental empire. A system suited for a cold climate might fail in a tropical one. This was a direct challenge to the search for universal, abstract principles of government. Instead, Montesquieu insisted that effective laws must be tailored to the living, breathing reality of a people. His most enduring contribution was his brilliant analysis of how to structure a government to prevent tyranny. He famously argued that political power must be separated into three distinct branches: the executive who enforces the laws, the legislative who makes them, and the judicial who interprets them. The genius of his system was not just the separation, but the careful balance. Each branch would be given the constitutional means to check the ambitions of the others, creating a stable equilibrium where liberty could flourish. While the idea of separated powers was not entirely new, no one had ever articulated its mechanics with such persuasive clarity and backed it with such a wealth of historical examples. His manuscript became the essential guidebook for a generation of constitution writers. When James Madison and the other American founders debated the structure of their new republic, they turned to Montesquieu. You can see his influence stamped directly onto the United States Constitution, with its clear separation of Congress, the presidency, and the Supreme Court, each with specific powers to check and balance the others. But his legacy runs even deeper. Montesquieu established a new, empirical approach to political science. Rather than dreaming up a perfect utopia, he studied how governments actually worked in the real world, comparing their successes and failures across history and culture. This tradition of comparative government, of understanding politics through observation and context rather than pure theory, remains a cornerstone of how we analyze nations to this day. His work reminds us that the spirit of the laws is not found in a philosopher's text, but in the intricate, delicate balance of a society's institutions. Rousseau's opening line rings with the force of a thunderclap: "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." These words were not an observation, but an accusation against the entire structure of 18th century society. His Social Contract, published in 1762, proposed a radical new answer to the oldest political question of all: what makes a government legitimate? For Rousseau, it was not the divine right of kings, nor was it a simple bargain to protect property, as Locke had argued. True legitimacy flowed from a single source: the general will of the people as a collective body. This was not just the will of the majority or the sum of all individual selfish desires. The general will was something more profound, the common good that rational citizens would choose if they set their private interests aside. To enter this social contract, individuals had to perform a stunning act of political surrender. They alienated all of their natural rights to the community itself, becoming equal participants in this new sovereign body. In return, they gained something new: civil liberty and moral agency. You would be forced to be free, Rousseau famously declared, meaning that in obeying the laws born from the general will, you were ultimately obeying your own higher collective self. This vision was electrifying: a pure, direct democracy where the people were both the authors and the subjects of the law. But this beautiful, terrifying idea contained a dark and troubling ambiguity. What happens to those who disagree? If the general will is always right, then the individual who stands against it must be mistaken, even dangerous to the collective good. Rousseau's logic provided little protection for minority rights or for the dissenting voice. This single manuscript, therefore, contains the seeds of two diametrically opposed futures. On one hand, it became a sacred text for democratic revolutionaries. Its language of popular sovereignty and the general will fueled the passions of the French Revolution, echoing in the cries for liberty, equality, and fraternity. Yet that very same concept, the infallible general will that brooks no opposition, was later twisted to justify the authoritarian collectivism of the 20th century, where the state claimed to know the true will of the people better than the people themselves. The power of Rousseau's thought, however, refused to be confined to politics alone. His ideas about the corruption of natural human goodness by society bled into literature, creating the archetype of the noble savage and fueling the Romantic movement's celebration of raw emotion over cold rationality. In education, his book Emile, a companion to this political vision, argued that learning should follow the child's natural development, shielding them from societal pressures that distort authentic character. This exploration of authenticity versus social corruption even prefigured modern psychology's interest in how our true selves are shaped and often misshapen by the world around us. The ambiguous legacy of the social contract stands as a permanent warning. A manuscript's influence is never pure. The same words that can inspire a people to claim their freedom can, in another time and another mind, be used to build newer, stronger chains. A pin factory may seem an odd birthplace for modern economics, yet it was in this humble setting that Adam Smith found his most powerful example of the division of labor. He described how one man drawing out the wire, another straightening it, a third cutting it, and others pointing it and fixing the heads, could produce tens of thousands of pins in a single day. If each worked alone, they might not make even one pin each. This simple observation opened his monumental manuscript, The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. Smith was not merely describing a more efficient factory, he was revealing the fundamental engine of prosperity itself. His genius was to see that this same principle of specialization, when scaled across an entire economy, could unlock unprecedented wealth for all of society. This was a radical departure from the prevailing economic doctrine of mercantilism, which viewed global trade as a fixed pie to be won through protectionism and hoarding gold. Smith argued that wealth was not a stockpile of treasure, but the living, flowing capacity of a nation to produce goods and services for its people. He systematically dismantled the logic of trade barriers and monopoly grants, showing how they impoverished consumers and stifled innovation. His most enduring and misunderstood concept is the invisible hand. He did not mean this as a mystical force, but as a straightforward metaphor for a social pattern that emerges unplanned. When individuals pursue their own self-interest by producing a good or offering a service for which there is a demand, they are led, as if by an invisible hand, to promote the public good. The baker does not provide bread out of charity, but to make a living, yet society still gets its daily bread. This spontaneous order, where the voluntary exchanges of millions create a complex, functioning system without any central director, was a breathtaking insight. It suggested that social harmony and economic coordination could arise organically from the bottom up. Smith grounded his entire theory in a relentless observation of the real world. His manuscript is filled with detailed accounts of the woolen trade, the colonial policies of Spain, and the wages of Scottish laborers. He was building an empirical science of commerce, not an abstract philosophy. This focus on the natural price of a good, the level to which its market price naturally gravitates, gave policymakers a practical compass. It helped them see that artificially fixing prices, whether too high or too low, would inevitably create shortages or gluts, disrupting the very flow of goods they hoped to control. The influence of this single book is almost immeasurable. It provided the intellectual arsenal for a century of moves toward free trade, from the repeal of the Corn Laws in Britain to the opening of global markets. Its ideas about the division of labor became the bedrock of modern industrial production and business management. Yet Smith was no simple ideologue. He was deeply aware of the moral dimensions of commercial society, having written an entire theory of moral sentiments on human sympathy. He warned about the potential for businessmen to conspire against the public interest and the stultifying effects of repetitive work on the laborer's mind. The Wealth of Nations endures not as a perfect prophecy, but as the foundational text that first gave us the language and the logic to understand the immense, decentralized, and often bewildering dance of the modern economy. A pamphlet could be a more powerful weapon than any army. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published anonymously in that frigid January of 1776, did not merely argue for American independence. It detonated the philosophical and emotional barriers that had prevented countless colonists from embracing the idea. While educated elites were still debating the finer points of their rights as Englishmen, Paine bypassed that entire conversation with a sledgehammer of common logic. He attacked the very institution of monarchy with a contempt that felt liberating to the common farmer and the city artisan. He called the king a royal brute and questioned the divine right of a hereditary ruler, asking why a continent should be governed by an island. This was not the language of parliamentary procedure. It was the language of the tavern and the town square, and it gave people permission to voice their deepest grievances. Paine's genius was his translation. He took the complex Enlightenment ideas of John Locke about natural rights and popular sovereignty and stripped them of their academic Latin shell. He presented them in plain, forceful English, using biblical references and metaphors that every colonist could instantly grasp. He argued that government was at best a necessary evil, and that its only legitimate purpose was the security and freedom of its people. When it failed in that duty, it was not just a right but a solemn responsibility to throw it off and start anew. He made the abstract concept of independence feel like the most practical, common-sense step forward. But a brilliant argument means nothing if it stays in a single coffee house. The pamphlet's impact was magnified 1,000-fold by its unprecedented distribution. It was priced so cheaply that almost anyone could afford a copy. It was read aloud in public squares, its most fiery passages debated in homes and workshops. In a colonial population of 2.5 million, an estimated 500,000 copies were sold and shared. This was not just a book, it was a shared cultural event, a single manuscript that created a common political consciousness across 13 disparate colonies. It gave a scattered, uncertain people a unified language for their desire for self-determination. The document's power lay in its timing and its clarity. It arrived at the precise moment when colonial frustration with British rule was at its peak, crystallizing a swirling cloud of resentment and hope into a single, coherent, and irresistible demand. Within months of its publication, the sentiment for independence, once a radical fringe position, became the will of a people, paving the way for the formal declaration just 6 months later. Common sense proves that the most dangerous manuscript is not always the most erudite, but the one that speaks directly to the heart of a crisis, giving a population the words for the future they are already beginning to imagine. The language of rights, so fiercely claimed by men, was about to be spoken in a new and revolutionary voice. Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman took the Enlightenment's most powerful ideas and asked a devastatingly simple question. If all men were born with natural rights and the capacity for reason, on what grounds were women excluded? Her 1792 manifesto argued that women were not naturally frivolous or intellectually inferior. Their minds were simply starved, systematically denied the rigorous education that cultivated reason and moral judgment in men. She observed that girls were taught from infancy to value beauty and charm over intellect, trained for the marriage market as if they were decorative objects. Wollstonecraft insisted that a proper education was not a luxury for women, but a fundamental right. essential for them to become virtuous citizens, capable partners, and rational mothers who could raise the next generation of enlightened thinkers. This was a direct assault on centuries of philosophical tradition, from Rousseau's ideal of a submissive and uneducated Sophie to the scientific assumptions of the era that framed female intellect as inherently weaker. Her critique extended beyond the classroom into the very fabric of social life. She attacked the sentimental novels that were considered proper reading for ladies, arguing that these stories filled their heads with unrealistic fantasies of romantic passion and left them unprepared for the practical realities of life. She envisioned a different foundation for marriage, one built not on fleeting infatuation or economic necessity, but on rational friendship and mutual respect between intellectual equals. This radical idea anticipated analyses that would emerge more than a century later, focusing on how culture itself manufactures and enforces the very gender differences it then claims are natural. The immediate impact of her work, however, was muted. It was met with ridicule and outrage, its author slandered for stepping so far outside the prescribed role for her sex. The manuscript was a spark that landed on damp tinder. Its true power lay dormant, waiting for a cultural shift that would finally allow its arguments to catch fire. It was rediscovered and championed by the suffragist movements of the 19th and 20th centuries, who found in Wollstonecraft's clear, rational prose a foundational text for their own struggle. Her manuscript stands as a powerful testament to an uncomfortable truth that the most radical ideas often must wait, patiently preserved on the page, for the world to become ready to hear them. A political idea must first survive the court of public opinion. The Federalist Papers were born in the white-hot urgency of a national crisis, written not for the ages but for the next edition of the New York newspapers. Following the contentious Constitutional Convention of 1787, the proposed framework for a stronger federal government faced fierce resistance. Alexander Hamilton, recognizing that New York's approval was crucial and far from certain, recruited James Madison and John Jay to mount a massive public defense. Writing under the shared pen name Publius, they embarked on a relentless publishing schedule, producing 85 essays in just under a year. This was not an academic exercise, it was a political campaign waged with ink, a direct appeal to the citizens who would ultimately decide the nation's fate. Their arguments had to be persuasive, clear, and grounded in the practical concerns of merchants, farmers, and shopkeepers. They tackled every conceivable objection, from the fear of a distant, overpowering central authority to the potential for tyranny in a large republic. The sheer speed and volume of their output, with essays sometimes appearing multiple times a week, created a sustained drumbeat of reasoned argument that slowly began to shift the public mood. What makes these papers so remarkable is their unique blend of high theory and gritty political reality. The authors were not distant philosophers, they were architects who had helped draft the very blueprint they were now defending. They knew where the compromises had been made, which bolts were loose and which beams were strong. This insider perspective gave their explanations an unparalleled authority and depth. When Publius explained the system of checks and balances, he was not describing an abstract ideal. He was walking the reader through the specific mechanisms designed to prevent any single branch of government from seizing control. He detailed how the president's veto could check Congress, how the Senate's advice and consent could check the president, and how an independent judiciary could uphold the Constitution against them all. This was political engineering made accessible, a masterclass in explaining how a machine of government was supposed to function. Their most enduring insight tackled a fundamental problem of democracy. How could a republic, historically prone to the tyranny of the majority, protect the rights of individuals and minority groups? In Federalist 10, James Madison presented a brilliant counterintuitive solution. The danger of faction, he argued, was not solved by creating a small, homogeneous society, but by expanding the republic across a vast territory. In a large and diverse nation, he reasoned, so many different interests and factions would exist that it would be nearly impossible for a single majority faction to form and consistently oppress the others. This multiplicity of interests would force compromise and negotiation, preventing any one group from dominating the political process. It was an argument for strength through diversity, made long before the word carried its modern meaning. The ultimate success of their project was proven not just by ratification, but by the paper's astonishing second life. Once the immediate political battle was won, these essays written for a newspaper deadline were collected and bound. They became the primary source for understanding the original intent of the Constitution's framers. For over 2 centuries, lawyers, judges, and scholars have turned to the words of Publius to decipher the meaning behind the document's sometimes ambiguous phrases. Supreme Court justices routinely cite the Federalist Papers in their opinions, using them as a guide to the foundational principles of the American system. This journey from daily editorial to canonical legal text is a testament to the power of a well-reasoned argument, proving that words written to win a fleeting political contest can, if they are profound enough, become the permanent conscience of a nation. A spectre is indeed haunting Europe, but its power came from the stark clarity of its diagnosis. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels did not write their manifesto from a position of political strength. They were relatively obscure intellectuals watching a continent tremble. Their genius was to articulate the invisible forces shaking the world, naming the immense productive power and the profound social dislocation of the new industrial age. They framed all of human history as a story of class struggle, a relentless conflict between those who own the means of production and those who must sell their labor to survive. This was not a dry academic theory. It was a dramatic narrative that gave millions of workers a new lens through which to understand their own lives, their poverty amidst plenty, and their collective power. The manuscript's most enduring insight was its unflinching praise for capitalism's revolutionary nature. It described the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, as having accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It marveled at how constant revolutionizing of production and the uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions defined this new economic system. Nothing was sacred, no ancient profession was safe. All that was solid melted into air. This was a system of immense creativity and immense destruction, and the manifesto captured its world-altering energy with a kind of horrified awe. Yet this very engine of progress, they argued, carried the seeds of its own potential downfall. The relentless drive for profit would lead to overproduction, economic crises, and the progressive immiseration of the proletariat, the industrial working class. The system, in its success, was creating its own grave diggers. This powerful combination of analysis and prophecy, wrapped in unforgettable phrases like "workers of the world, unite," gave the document a life of its own. Translated into countless languages, smuggled across borders, and read in secret meetings, it became a political virus. It provided the foundational script for revolutionary movements from Russia to China to Cuba, each adapting its core tenets to their local conditions. Its influence is a perfect case study in the autonomous power of ideas. 2 men with a printing press could unleash a force that would eventually challenge empires and shape the geopolitical landscape of the 20th century. Even for those who vehemently reject its revolutionary call, the manifesto's critical framework remains potent. Its focus on economic alienation, the concentration of wealth, and the inherent instability of market systems continues to inform critiques of globalization and inequality, proving that a manuscript's true legacy is not just in the solutions it proposes, but in the uncomfortable questions it forces every society to ask itself. A quiet revolution was unfolding in the English countryside, built not on barricades but on the meticulous study of barnacles, pigeon breeds, and earthworms. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species presented a theory of such profound simplicity and power that it redefined life itself. He argued that the staggering diversity of the natural world was not the static creation of a divine designer, but the dynamic product of a slow, relentless process he called natural selection. The true force of his argument lay not in a single dramatic proof, but in the sheer weight of interconnected evidence he compiled from every corner of the natural sciences. He showed how the unique species of the Galapagos Islands were subtly different variations of mainland ancestors. He demonstrated how the fossil record, though incomplete, revealed a succession of ancient forms. He pointed to the similar bone structures in the wing of a bat, the flipper of a seal, and the hand of a human, suggesting a common ancestry. This mountain of data from biogeography, paleontology, and morphology made his conclusion increasingly inescapable for any serious observer. Darwin's intellectual honesty was as crucial as his evidence. He dedicated an entire chapter to the difficulties of his theory, openly acknowledging the gaps in the fossil record and the complexity of the human eye, inviting critics to test his ideas at their strongest points. This transparent approach modeled a new kind of scientific integrity, where a theory's strength was measured by its ability to withstand rigorous scrutiny. The immediate cultural impact was volcanic. The book was a direct challenge to the most deeply held beliefs about humanity's special place in the cosmos. If life was the product of a blind, mechanical process of variation and selection, what became of the idea of a purposeful creation? The comfortable notion of a world designed for human dominion was replaced by a vision of a vast, branching tree of life, with humanity as just one recent twig. This single manuscript forced a painful but necessary reconsideration of concepts that had underpinned Western thought for centuries, from design and purpose to the very definition of human uniqueness. Its gradual acceptance is a masterclass in how scientific paradigms truly shift. There was no single experiment that proved evolution overnight. Instead, Darwin's framework was so powerful and comprehensive that it slowly absorbed the very anomalies that initially seemed to contradict it, providing a better explanation for the evidence than any alternative. The story of the origin is the story of an idea so vast it could not be contained within biology, spilling over to reshape philosophy, theology, and our most fundamental understanding of our own place in the grand, unfolding story of nature. A new century demanded a new map of the human mind. Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams arrived with a publication date of 1900, a deliberate leap into the modern era, and it proposed a reality as strange and layered as any fictional underworld. He argued that our nightly dreams are not random nonsense, but the disguised fulfillment of repressed wishes, often forged in the crucible of childhood. This was not a simple theory of sleep. It was a radical claim that our conscious waking life is merely the visible tip of a vast, submerged psychic iceberg. The true drama of the self, with its forbidden desires and unresolved conflicts, was playing out in a hidden theater, and dreams were its carefully coded productions. Freud provided a method for cracking this code. He distinguished between the dream's manifest content, the bizarre storyline we remember upon waking, and its latent content, the true, unsettling meaning hidden beneath the surface. His technique of interpretation treated every element of a dream, from a mist train to an unfamiliar room, as a symbolic clue to be analyzed through free association, where the patient says whatever comes to mind without censorship. This process was a form of archaeology for the soul, digging through the debris of the day to uncover the ancient fossils of childhood experience buried deep within. The manuscript's most explosive assertions directly challenged the strict propriety of the Victorian age. His concepts of infantile sexuality and the Oedipus complex, the child's unconscious sexual desire for the parent of the opposite sex, were seen as scandalous. They suggested that the foundational family unit was a cauldron of primal passions, and that the civilized adult was forever negotiating a truce with the unruly, desiring child they once were. This vision of a mind perpetually at war with itself, where irrational impulses constantly threatened to break through the thin veneer of rationality, offered a powerful new framework for understanding human conflict, creativity, and neurosis. Why would an artist be driven to create, or a person compelled to repeat self-destructive patterns? For Freud, the answer often lay in the unresolved pressures of the unconscious. The influence of this single book seeped far beyond the therapist's couch. It gave modernist writers like Virginia Woolf and James Joyce the license to explore the stream of consciousness, mapping the associative, non-linear flow of thought. Surrealist painters like Salvador Dali sought to paint the dreamscape itself, unleashing bizarre imagery from the unconscious onto the canvas. In everyday life, people began to speak casually of Freudian slips, those verbal stumbles that seemed to reveal a hidden intention. The very way we think about motivation, memory, and self-deception was permanently altered. Yet the manuscript's legacy is profoundly mixed. Many of its core claims, from the universality of the Oedipus complex to the detailed symbolism of dream analysis, have been widely discredited by modern neuroscience and psychology for lacking empirical rigor. But this is precisely what makes its story so instructive. The interpretation of dreams demonstrates that a manuscript's ultimate power is not always in its scientific accuracy, but in its cultural resonance. It gave the 20th century a new vocabulary for its inner conflicts, a set of tools for self-examination, and a lasting, if controversial, reminder that we are never quite the masters of our own house. A clerk in a Swiss patent office was quietly rewriting the rules of the universe. Albert Einstein's 1905 paper on special relativity began with a simple but profound puzzle. What would happen if you could chase a beam of light? He realized that the laws of physics must appear the same for all observers moving at constant velocity, and that the speed of light in a vacuum is a constant, an absolute speed limit for the cosmos. This led to stunning conclusions that defy everyday experience. Imagine two lightning bolts striking a train track, one at the front of a moving train and one at the back. An observer standing on the platform would see them strike simultaneously, but a passenger seated perfectly in the middle of the moving train would see the forward bolt first, because the train is moving toward that flash of light. Both perspectives are equally valid. There is no universal now. Time itself is relative, stretching and compressing depending on your motion. This is not a perceptual trick. It is a physical reality confirmed by countless experiments with ultra-precise atomic clocks on fast-moving jets. His famous equation, E equals mc squared, emerged from this work, revealing a deep equivalence between mass and energy and unlocking the hidden power within the atom. A decade later, Einstein completed his revolution with the general theory of relativity. He was troubled by a discrepancy in Newton's gravity, which acted instantly across vast distances. How could the sun reach out and pull the Earth without any apparent connection? Einstein's genius was to reframe the problem entirely. He proposed that gravity is not a force pulling objects together, but a consequence of the geometry of spacetime itself. Think of spacetime as a taut, flexible rubber sheet. A massive object like the sun creates a deep dimple in this fabric. The Earth, then, is not being pulled by a mysterious force, but is simply following the straightest possible path, a groove or orbit within this curved geometry. This elegant idea predicted bizarre and beautiful phenomena. Light, which has no mass, would still be forced to follow these curves, meaning a massive star could bend the light from a more distant star, acting as a gravitational lens. This was confirmed during a solar eclipse in 1919, when astronomers observed starlight bending exactly as Einstein's equations predicted. His theory also described gravity's waves, ripples in spacetime caused by colossal events like colliding black holes, a prediction confirmed a century later. The mathematical language needed to express this radical vision of warped spacetime already existed, but it was not Einstein's creation. The geometry of curved surfaces had been developed decades earlier by the German mathematician Bernhard Riemann. Einstein, struggling for years to find the right form for his equations, finally turned to this sophisticated mathematical toolkit with the help of his friend Marcel Grossmann. This collaboration highlights a vital pattern in the history of science. A revolutionary idea often requires a pre-existing language to give it voice. The theoretical physicist provides the vision, while generations of mathematicians may have already supplied the vocabulary. It is a relay race across disciplines and centuries, where the final breakthrough depends on the accumulated work of countless minds. The implications of these manuscripts ripple far beyond astrophysics. They dismantled Isaac Newton's clockwork universe of absolute space and absolute time, replacing it with a fluid, dynamic cosmos where the observer is inextricably linked to the reality they measure. This forced a profound philosophical shift, challenging our most basic intuitions about reality, and this abstract theory has tangible consequences in your pocket. The global positioning system in your phone or car must account for the subtle time dilation predicted by both special and general relativity. The atomic clocks on the satellites run at a slightly different rate than clocks on Earth due to their speed and the planet's weaker gravity. Without Einstein's corrections, your GPS would be wrong by several miles within a single day. Perhaps the most inspiring part of this story is its origin. These world-altering ideas did not emerge from a prestigious university laboratory. They were conceived by a young patent clerk, a mind operating outside the established institutions, proving that genius can blossom anywhere, given the freedom to question everything. These 41 manuscripts, when viewed as a single library, reveal a deep and recurring rhythm to cultural change. Certain conditions appear again and again, creating the fertile ground where a single text can reshape the world. A crucial catalyst is always a shift in the technology of thought itself. The invention of the codex replaced the awkward scroll, making it easier to bookmark and cross-reference complex arguments. Gutenberg's press then turned the unique manuscript into a shared, reliable object, allowing two thinkers a continent apart to debate the same sentence. Today, the digital revolution has collapsed the distance between writer and reader to nearly nothing, creating an unprecedented potential for instantaneous global dissemination of ideas. Yet technology alone is not enough. These documents almost always emerge during periods of intense social friction, when old systems are cracking and people are hungry for new frameworks. Martin Luther's theses landed in a Europe simmering with resentment toward distant authority. John Locke's treatises gave voice to a people weary of arbitrary power. The manuscript gives form to a tension that is already there, offering a vocabulary for a change that many are already feeling in their bones. Another powerful pattern is the cross-pollination of traditions, where ideas travel along trade routes or are preserved by a rival civilization. Aristotle's works, lost to the West, were safeguarded and expanded by Islamic scholars before their triumphant return to Europe. The flood story from the Epic of Gilgamesh finds a powerful echo in the Hebrew Bible, showing how narratives morph and adapt across cultures. This intellectual fusion repeatedly proves that the most transformative ideas are often those that have journeyed, encountering and absorbing different perspectives. And behind nearly every one of these texts stands an individual who displayed immense personal courage. Galileo risked the wrath of the Church to share what he saw through his telescope. Mary Wollstonecraft faced public scorn to demand rights her society refused to see. These were not safe opinions, but dangerous thoughts committed to paper with the full knowledge of the potential consequences. Perhaps the most comforting pattern for any thinker today is the long arc of influence. Many of these world-changing manuscripts were not immediate bestsellers. Copernicus received his published book on his deathbed, his revolution left for others to fight. The Arthashastra lay forgotten in a library for over 1,000 years before its rediscovery. An idea often needs time to find its audience, to wait for the world to catch up to its radical implications. This historical perspective offers a fascinating lens for our own chaotic moment. We are living through another information explosion, as profound in its own way as the arrival of the printing press. We are surrounded by countless digital manuscripts, blogs, white papers, and social threads, all vying for attention. Which of these contemporary writings contain the seeds of a future paradigm shift? Which arguments, now circulating in niche corners of the internet, will our descendants look back on as the blueprints for their world? The patterns of the past suggest that the next transformative manuscript is already among us, waiting for its moment to coalesce from the noise and begin its slow, steady work of rebuilding human thought. This great conversation across time, documented in these 41 manuscripts, reveals our shared and unending quest for meaning. Each voice, from the scribe in a monastic cell to the scientist in a quiet study, added a new thread to the vast tapestry of human understanding. They prove that cultural earthquakes often start as quiet tremors within a single mind, a thought so powerful it demands to be written down. That initial act of writing is a leap of faith, a message cast into the future with no guarantee it will ever be found, let alone change the world. The journey of these ideas is never predictable. A political treatise written for a specific crisis can become the cornerstone of a new nation centuries later. A scientific theory, dismissed in its time, can slowly rewire our perception of reality. The true impact of a manuscript is not measured by its immediate reception, but by its ability to resonate across generations, finding new relevance in contexts its author could never have foreseen. As we stand in our own age of overwhelming information, where digital words flow in an endless stream, we are left with a profound question. Which of the ideas being written today, perhaps in a blog post, a research paper, or a shared digital document, contain the seeds of tomorrow's transformation? Which contemporary voice, currently speaking to a small circle, will someday have their words amplified by history to address the entire world? The legacy of these 41 manuscripts is not a closed book, but an open invitation. It challenges us to write with courage, to read with discernment, and to recognize that the next great idea that shapes our collective future may be taking form right now, waiting for its moment to ripple through the centuries. If this journey through 41 world-changing manuscripts has sparked a new curiosity in you, consider this an open invitation to continue the exploration on your own. Many of these foundational texts are more accessible than you might think, available in modern translations through online archives or your local library. Pick up a copy of the Analects and hear the voice of Confucius for yourself, or read through the arguments in the Federalist Papers to feel the urgency of that founding political moment. Each of these documents is a door waiting to be opened. I would love to hear which manuscript from our list most surprised you, or perhaps which contemporary book, article, or even digital document you believe carries the seed of a future paradigm shift. Share your thoughts in the comments below and join a conversation that stretches back through the centuries. If you want to continue tracing the powerful currents of ideas that have shaped our history, subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. Our next deep dives will continue to uncover the hidden origins of the beliefs that define our modern world. Your own engagement, your curiosity, and your voice are part of this ongoing story, connecting our present conversations directly to that rich heritage of cultural transformation